In my 1993 book, Technotrends, I said that trust is the glue that holds the net-enabled knowledge economy together. Why did I say that back then? Because we live in an increasingly digital, interconnected world where we're doing e-commerce. You want to have trust when you're buying and selling online. We're communicating, we're collaborating, and let's face it, we're doing just about everything online, including sharing news. Trust is the key to making all of that work. So I'm really excited to bring to you the top expert on trust. Our expert today is David Horsager, who will teach us how to elevate trust, both organizationally and personally, in a world with increasing levels of disinformation. David is the CEO of Trust Edge Leadership Institute and a global authority on helping leaders and organizations become the most trusted in their industry. He is the inventor of the Enterprise Trust Index, director of the annual study, The Trust Outlook, and a national best-selling author of Trusted Leader, 8 Pillars That Drive Results. David's clients range from Fortune 500 companies to professional sports teams and global governments. Hey, welcome, David.
Hey, thank you so much. It's great to be here, Dan.
Yeah,
what a treat to be with you.
Yeah, well, look, you are indeed the authority on this, and your research is fantastic. I mean, I've run a research company for, I'm coming up on 40 years now. And I know the power of good research, and I can just tell everyone you are the best at this. So with that said, what are some of the things that you're finding in your latest Trust Outlook study?
The number one reason people want to work for an organization in first world countries, all first world countries, may be different if you have to put bread on the table in third world countries, but in first world countries, ahead of more pay, more compensation, a more fun work environment with a ping pong table, number one, trusted leadership. Nothing speeds up the sale more than increasing trust. What we find about Net Promoter Score, we asked about referrals, and what we found is you don't get referrals with referrals. The only way to increase referrals is increase trust. New data, I'll just show you our study. I think you're going to point it out later. But the big problem here, only 13% of people totally trust their employer. What are we going to do if trust is so important? Number one reason, I'll say a couple things about the definitions of trust. Some people are, first of all, let me say this, Dan. Back when I started my grad work around this, almost nobody was talking about trust, a couple decades ago. Trust leadership. Now everybody's talking about trust and leadership with and mostly without research. So you have people saying things like transparency, that equals trust. And of course, transparency can build trust. In fact, I'll give you a data point here. Last study, 92% of people would trust their senior leader more if they were more transparent about their mistakes. Not transparent about how cool they are, but about their mistakes. And yet, transparency does not equal trust. You got some of your kids some of your teenagers are so transparent on social media. I don't trust them for a second because confidentiality is also trusted. So, in fact, competency is also trusted. And, we talk about the 8 pillars of trust. So trust is more complex than people might think at first. In fact, we might think, yes, there's some true data here from the research that we trust our leader more if they're more transparent about their mistakes. And yet, if we have a leader that's only transparent about their mistakes and just transparent, pretty soon we don't think they're competent at all because it's more complex than we might think. So there's a whole lot more data, generations and trust, big finding. Boomers would work longer hours, be a better team player, be more loyal, stay longer if they trusted their senior leader. And there's a whole lot of people that think generations are so different. And yet in this data, every generation said the same thing, plus or minus 1%. So lots more.
So let me jump in on that just a bit. And by the way, if you want to jump in or anything, just let me know. All right. So a couple of things. There was a big study that was done to find out why we had the Great Resignation. By the way, that's kind of continuing. There's the re-resignation. And why is that? And it showed that by far, most people were not quitting or leaving the company. They were quitting or leaving their boss. And trust is at the core of that. So here's an action step that I would come up with just listening to what you were saying. And that is, since trust is so important as a leader, what I want to do is make sure that I'm double and triple verifying any news, any information that I'm sharing. because I don't want to be the one saying something that they know is not accurate. So that means double, triple verify everything. And I know I do this whenever I'm sharing with anybody. I take that as a responsibility. By the way, I know you do that too, David, and I've got to check it out and spend the extra time. Why? Because I want high trust. So I would say that's a strategy right away. Don't just take the one source and say, I can share that with my team.
Well, we got a lot of strategies we can get to, but I'll say to that point that you've just given, what do we know from the data too, and other research? Institutional trust is down steeply in America. So if you think of, and I'm going to come back to why, to your point exactly, and that is, if we go back a long time, trust was local. I trust, there's two reasons we don't trust, right? I don't know you. You live over that mountain. I don't know you. The other reason is I do know you. Eek! I don't trust you because I know you, right? So one of those two reasons. And so it's localized, then it became institutionalized. And because of institutions, we were able to give a framework like we could trust it. Institutions are slower moving. Well, the trust in institutions in America, and I'm just going to speak to the U.S. part right here, have tanked steeply since Watergate. And then all of a sudden, government, about 80% of our government people, about 80% of people trusted government to basically do what was right. Now it's something like 7%. Only media is worse. It's like 2%. Do you remember when we had the news? Not anymore. You have your news, you have your news, you have your news. There's a lot of reasons institutions are stacked against trust in America right now. And one of the reasons under media would be exactly what you said is we don't have any regulation anymore. In fact, it happened under both parties, both under Clinton, I believe it was 96, and then Reagan in 87. And, all of a sudden, news can say whatever they want, so it doesn't have to be the news. And I'm not big on a lot of regulation. However, certain types can actually increase trust, just like I can, I might put a lock on something so that I trust that my bike isn't stolen, right? Or something. So there's and yet the cost of that lack of trust is enormous because if I don't trust. So just to the point that you made, institutional trust in media, we have to check it, double check it more than ever because there aren't institutionalized regulators so people can do whatever they want, which of course is entertainment, draws the eyeballs, not truth. And so we have less trust in entertainment and so forth. There's less trust in religion than ever before, even though the same amount of people trust in God, they say in America. There's less trust in schools, even though, when I grew up, homeschooling was weird. Now it's not. But we don't trust the institution of education as much. Farming, I grew up with food farming. We used to, semi-loads of dark red kidney beans. Now the restaurant doesn't want a semi-load. They want to grow it outside and pet it and sing music to it and pick it off with white gloves and know that it was grown 20 feet away from the plate. So there's things that are changing. And we see trust became distributed with Uber and Airbnb. And now we're going back to a localized type, which is creating nationalism for good or bad in certain parts of the world. So trust is changing. And yet the framework for how trust is built is the same as it always was. How trust is built in brands, organizations, and even around the globe.
One other little point to go along with your media, and that is that latest research, again, is showing that close to 80% of people get their news from the internet. And so, in other words, there's nothing vetted there. It's not like they used to have where you had to check your sources. Remember the movie Watergate or any of those where they had to double check and triple check and quadruple check their sources before they dare to put it out. Well, when you got 80% that are getting the news from whatever, you end up with a lot of distrust. So how do you help your companies elevate trust internally as well as help companies elevate trust with their customers? What are some ways that companies can do that? Because we've got a lot of leaders. And by the way, there's a lot of people watching this from other parts of the world. And trust is universal. I mean, it is a global thing that is probably the most powerful thing of all. So any things that we could do?
Yes. So first of all, we have to have a common language, and we have a whole lot of tactics and takeaways we can get to under this, but we have to understand how trust is built. And so I'll give the quick
Good.
framework of 8 pillars of trust. And they're denoted by C words in the English language. Don't think of them as kind of 8 motivational C's. They represent each a really important research funnel, but I'll give them so we kind of have context. So number 1, and by the way, these work around the globe. I contextualize if we're dealing with policing issues or corruption issues in East Africa, or I might start with a certain pillar in Latin America compared to the pro sports team, but they're all critical to gain this advantage we call the trust edge. We think it's the best advantage you can have. We think, by the way, at the beginning here, trust is always the core issue. This is what people get wrong. I think they're solving for something else, like leadership. Well, the only reason I follow a leader not is trust. Sales, the only reason people buy has something to do with trust. Innovation goes up when people trust each other, then they'll share ideas. Learning goes up in a classroom when people either trust the content, the teacher, or the trust or psychological safety of the room. Diversity on its own pits people against each other. Unless you increase trust, then you get the benefits of diversity, equity, inclusion, belonging. So we have to deal with trust. So how is it built? Trust is built by 8 things. Number 1, clarity. People trust those that are clear. They mistrust or distrust those that are ambiguous or overly complex. Number 2, they trust compassion. We trust those that care beyond themselves, or a big word that came out of this research funnel was intent. We trust those that have intent or care in some way, even if they don't care about me. They trust about some mission or some people group beyond themselves, then I might trust them. Number 3 is character. We trust those that do what's right over what's easy. We might think character is important. It is, but it's not everything. I might trust Dan to take my kids to the ball game because of his character, and not trust Dan to give me a root canal because of competency at that specifically. Number 4 is competency. Yeah. You've got to be competent, right? You've got in the area on a trust. So if you're a teacher and you're teaching the way you were 30 years ago, I don't trust you. If you're leading the way you were just 5 years ago, I don't trust you. You've got to stay fresh and relevant and capable. This is why your work on growing and anticipatory leader is so critical, right? Because that's the type of leader I tend to trust. The next pillar is competency. Then it's commitment. We trust those that stay committed. If I think you're going to jump, if there's a pandemic or some challenge, I'm not going to actually trust you. As hard as it might be, if you think of anybody that's left a legacy in history or your life, your mom, dad, first grade teacher, Martin Luther King, Gandhi, Jesus, Joan of Arc, they were trusted in many cases because they stayed committed to something by their people, maybe to death, right? So we trust commitment. The next pillar is connection. We trust those that are willing to connect and collaborate with others. If I look at an organization that has a lot of siloing, or believe it or not, there are companies that incentivize against this pillar, which is I'm going to incentivize you if you use all of your budget, in spite of if we could move it a little bit for this year, for this specific project. But because I'm going to incentivize siloing, you're going to lose under this pillar, which always loses trust, which always costs in the bottom line. And the second to last pillar is contribution. The number 1 word here to think about, and that came out of this research funnel, was results. You can have compassion and character, but if you don't contribute the results I expect or ask for, I'm not going to trust you. But we've also learned you can get a lot of results and not with compassion or character and also lose. Final pillar is consistency. We trust sameness. For good or bad, a reputation is only built on sameness. A brand is only built on sameness. The feel, not just the logo and look, I mean the feel of a brand. It's like, by the way, you can be trusted for good or bad. If you're late consistently, I will absolutely trust you to be late, right? So these 8 pillars are how trust is built in a brand, in a marketing message, in a culture, in an organization, and in a person. And now we can get to, we like to, a load of strategies under those, but I'll pause.
Yeah, no, I think those are all fantastic. Again, that's one of the things I love about your work is you need to understand, just like when I'm teaching people about trends to start out with, I have to give them, whether it's hard trends based on future facts that will happen and soft trends that may or may not happen. You got to give them a framework before you can dig down. So I do want to dig down. And again, I think what would be a first step to evaluating your level of trust within your organization. If I've got a company, we've got a lot of leaders watching this. How do I get started with that? And by the way, one way I'll tell you right now, I'll speak for you. I would read David's book. Let's put that book up there for just a minute. Trusted Leader, 8 Pillars That Drive Results. This is a best-selling book. It's practical. It's loaded with how-tos. I would just make that happen and get into that right off the bat. There's other things that we can do, and we'll talk about in a little bit, but now go for it.
Well, in that book, we give a free assessment at the back that you can kind of assess on. We have 6 assessments we use here to measure the pillars of trust in a brand, an organization, a team. But we're always, because that's what the research says, it comes to those 8. We're measuring whether we're in an enterprise trust index with a massive pharmaceutical or a university with 82 questions, or whether we're on a 40-question team assessment, or we're trusted a 360 assessment. It's all behaviors or attributes of the 8-pillar framework. So if I never get to speak to you again, I would take on a napkin in front of you those 8 pillars, and without all the research, because our gut does pretty well, interestingly enough, I would just, if we don't have all that, if I was going to just measure and say on this project or on this problem, 1 out of 10, how clear was I really? Compassion, 1 out of 10. How much did I actually show, or am I showing I'm caring under this? 1 out of 10, just a gut check. You could do one of those simple wheels, 1 to 10, and color it out on each of the 8 and see how off your wheel is. If you have, 8 areas around a wheel, and you can see on that diagram, okay, then I would take that pillar and I'll give a process. Let's just say one of your weaknesses, like many, is clarity. Clarity is so hard because the world's changing so fast. What would I do? Here's one strategy. Let's just take those, do the wheel or do the 1 out of 10 and say, which one is my biggest opportunity? Oh, it's consistency, or oh, it's clarity. I feel like on that message, I wasn't consistent, or on this project, we weren't clear, or we aren't showing commitment to our people. Let me oversimplify it one more time here, though. Let's take a marketing message. Okay, is this message trusted? Well, is it clear? Does it show compassion to the people? Is it on brand for our character? Is it showing commitment? Does it show our results, contribution? If it shows these 8, you can 1 out of 10 each of those too, just on a gut without our validated measurement tools, which of course you can get from us and we can really help with. But, so here's one process, one way I might get to clarity. And not clarity of the pillar, but clarity of what I do to step forward, a process. Okay, so there's a lot of words and questions that people ask in strategic planning. And for example, the why is a big one today, and it's good to have a purpose. No doubt about it. I agree with Simon Sinek and many others' work. It's good to have purpose. But that's not one of the questions that takes an idea to an action. So what about the who? What about Jim Collins? Jim Collins' work, getting the right people on the bus, it's great. No doubt. It's better to have the right people and have them in the right place on the bus. And yet, that's not an idea that takes an idea to an action. So what are the questions that actually take an idea to an action? I mean, I see plenty of really fun buses singing Kumbaya about their why, going right off the cliff, unfortunately. So what takes an idea to an action? And this little simple strategy I'm going to teach right now, we've had people use it to triple sales. This is how I lost 52 pounds in 5.5 months. This is how the second biggest healthcare organization in North America said this process changed them 7 years later and was the tipping point of change. And I can tell you about it. But basically, here it is. 3 questions that actually take an idea to an action. Once you know that thing you want to take this to this. You want to lose 50 pounds. You want to gain 20 pounds. You want to make it $1,000. Or you want to increase that pillar. Once you've defined the pillar, I want to strengthen that pillar. Here's the process, 3 questions. It's going to sound easy. It's not. Number 1, simple. Okay, how am I going to do that? Number 2 is way more important. How am I going to do that? And number 3, of course, is how? Most important question of all is, if you can get good at this process, it sounds simple, but the how process, how, until you ask how, until you can act on it today or tomorrow, that how is actually the lever for real clarity. It actually takes an idea to an action. So I want to take in less calories. How am I going to do that? I'm not going to drink my calories. How am I going to do that? When I get on the plane, I'm going to order a Fresca instead of a Coke. Fresca, no calories. I finally got to a how I can do on the plane. I'm going to read more. How am I going to do that? I'm just going to read more. No, you're not. You've had that opportunity forever. I'm going to sell more. Maybe you need to get a book. I'm going to sell more. How are you going to do that? Well, I'm just going to call more people. No, you're not. How are you going to call more people? Well, I suppose I better get a list. Okay, how are you going to get a list? And you finally went backwards enough. How process until you can act on it today or tomorrow. So one way would be evaluate the pillars, take a pillar and say how, until I can do something today or tomorrow. We do how plans as teams. And when we do this on teams, a final how always has a who, when, and where. By the way, we've been lied to. Many of you think co-leadership is great. Co-leadership is terrible. The data shows if you have more than one person on a final task, you have less than 50% chance of it getting done. Let one person own it. Don't have Jill and Susie. Don't have Bill and Mark. Some people are going to say, well, yeah, but I know this company with co-CEOs. If it's working, the only reason is because they have different roles. There needs to be a final person and a final who, a final when. If I'm going to work out tomorrow morning and I don't know when, chances are low. If I know it's 5:30 in the morning, chances go up. If I don't know where, even if that's virtually, I say if choices don't win here, by the way, on how. So I'm either going to go to the gym or I'm going to go for a run. Anytime I have a choice, it opens up another choice, which is stay in bed. How, until you have a who, when, and where. So that's one process that you could use. Take the 8 pillars and how, one of them until you can do something to strengthen that pillar.
So I would like to advise, let's put this up, your website, that people can look at some of these assessments, can download some of those assessments, thetrustedge.com. Find a lot on there. And as a matter of fact, let's just get into something that we talked about earlier, and that is for those watching this, you're actually going to give them special access to some very valuable tools. This is something you don't normally give away. And I think I'm just going to get into this right away. Tell us what it is, and then I'll have Jennifer put it up on the screen so we can see how to get into it. So tell us what all this is, because it sounded really cool.
For my friend Dan, here it is. I'm actually opening it up right now because they just added a whole new thing. So all of our newest research is here. That each of the outlooks are here for the last several years. Our revalidation, the validation of the pillars, but more important, how to build trust in your organization. Our DMA strategy, which is difference-making actions, how to do the most important thing every day, the 90-day quick plan strategy, process, how to create your own personal mission statement. Here's a really good one. The 6-step accountability framework. Most organizations, you can't have a healthy, high-trust organization without healthy accountability. As you know, this is one of the problems today. People say, well, what about in a virtual environment? Yeah, virtual can actually work if you have healthy accountability. Even in the midst of virtual, you have to have high trust. You have healthy accountability. How to rebuild trust is in here. How to have 10 or less emails in your inbox. That's a productivity tip. A bunch of 12 ways to be a great communicator, high trust communicator. A bunch of videos in here on each of the pillars. 6 ways to motivate results. That's a big one under our contribution pillar. There's a whole leader's guide to the book and tenants. We put so much in this to give people ways to go deeper and more, both individually, how to increase sales with trust, and how to be a greater leader, how to have organizational trust. Here's one that's interesting for your organization. 10-step process for instituting high trust change. Many organizations want to have transformational change, and if they don't follow the right process, they have a hard time ever with that actually taking and actually moving them forward. They'll do some flash pan thing, or they won't get the right buy-in. There's a part of it to create buy-in. But if you follow that 10-step process, you have a chance at actually transformational change in big organizations.
Well, that is an amazing amount that you're giving away. When you told me at the beginning that you were going to do this, I said, "Are you sure you want to do this, David?" They said, "Yep, for you, we'll do that." So let's put up that the email. Because to get this, again, this is something he doesn't usually do. So there's not like a .com you go to. Yeah. So you email that email.
McKella, not McKella, MIKELLA @trustedge.com. And we put in there for you today, just put trust tools. And we said we'd send them for free. There won't be a wall. There won't be a pay thing. There'll be we'll just have just think of Dan smiling, just like, hey, because you're friends of Dan, you're going to have an inside access to trust tools. There you go.
All right. I'll leave that up there for a second. I want you to write this down and get this. I mean, look at what he's going to give you here. So I think
there's
you ought to
no
pick-
sales on this page. There's nothing selly. It's just
Right.
a
I
gift.
know.
It's
I know.
that's it.
Well, again, thank you so much for doing that for everyone. And by the way, since we're giving some things away, I also know that you have your latest research study, and let's put that up. And it's the 2022 Trust Outlook, and that's another one that you can get. And by the way, there will be, I'm going to predict the future, a 2023 that'll be coming out.
That's coming out very soon, by the way. In fact, my
yeah.
meeting, right after we're done, my meeting is on the newest research, but I'm not going to say anything about that. It's coming. But we're doing some really cool things with that on who to trust, who can you trust, and some really, really fun new information.
So I would get the one that we just put up there so you can get up to speed. And then here's what I'd suggest you do. Wait until you're somewhere in the January, mid-January, later January. Go back to trustedge.com and you'll be able to download the latest one. So another great resource. All right, let's get back to us trying to help people with some of the other things that we can help them to do. And I know you're giving them a lot of tools to do this, but for the people that are watching this, what are some of the things that they can do when they have lost trust? Because you lose trust. We might lose trust because we implement something. New. And by the way, for those of you, most of you have seen my anticipatory learning system. You're part of that. And you know that when one of the things I said is an anticipatory leader is before you implement any new product, any new strategy, before you do it, you ask yourself, what will happen to trust if we do it in this way? And if trust goes down, don't do it in that way. Now, notice I didn't say don't do it, period. The key is in that way. Change how you do it so trust stays where it is. And if anybody can raise the bar on trust in your organization, reward them openly because you get the behaviors you reward. So that's one of the ways that we can do pre-mortems instead of post-mortems. Let's pre-mortem this thing so we know why it's going to fail before it does so we can make those changes. Other things that relate to now the question I put to you, and that is, all right, so even with all that, we lost trust. What do we do?
Well, I think the one thing you're so right on is how we do things is loses more trust than what we do. I watched a massive company, fire people by putting everybody's name on sheets. And after I spoke to 800 people, they had to go check and see is their name up or not. And I watched the CEO of Red Wings Shoes do a positive masterclass during the pandemic of having to lay off 2,000 people because of the pandemic. And the way he did it actually increased trust in how he did it. So
yes.
I'll tell you one.
Wait. That's really important.
Yeah.
It's not what you do. It is how you're doing it. And you can, because I've seen this in organization as well. They did something like laying people off and they actually gained trust because of how they did it. So I just wanted to really make that important.
And to this point, and I'm getting to an actual tip, but the number one time, the fastest opportunity you have to build trust, by the way, is not first interaction. Your fastest opportunity to build trust is in crisis. How you respond to crisis. When was George W. Bush in America the most trusted as president? His ratings were the highest the week after 9/11. How you respond in a crisis matters more than ever. By the way, you can lose trust faster than ever too. But if people are throwing chairs, swearing, ticked at you, you have an incredible opportunity if you can do the things that build trust in that time. So your question before was, how do you rebuild trust once you've lost trust? And just to let you know, and I won't get into all of these, but we have about a 10-step process. Our certified partners have a 10-step process for how you build trust if you've lost trust. But whether you've had an oil spill and are a big company, or you're an individual, it actually comes down to the same thing. The last, final, number one activity that rebuilds trust is one thing, and it is not the apology. Many people think you rebuild trust on the apology. You never do. It doesn't mean not to apologize. To open the door of communication, but you don't rebuild trust on the apology. Think of this. Somebody's come to you and they say, I'm sorry I'm late. And you're like, no, you're not. You're late every single time. You're late every time. No, I'm sorry I'm late this time. No, I'm sorry I'm late. I'm not saying don't apologize. I'm saying the only time or only way you rebuild trust ever, no matter what you've done, whether as a company or an individual, is to make and keep a new commitment. So if you're going to rebuild trust, the data shows you have to make or keep make and keep a new promise. And we saw that happen with some very difficult situations. A big BP oil spill, they put on a masterclass of rebuilding trust in a very tough environment, in a time when, the environment is more important than ever. And we saw, others do the opposite by not doing what they said they were going to do. And so making and keeping a commitment, that's something to put out at the forefront. And another reminder under this is, we often, old idea, but true still, we often judge others by their actions and ourselves by our intent. And under this commitment pillar, we'll often think, yeah, but I didn't mean to. And we won't think we have to rebuild trust because, yeah, but my situation was different. Yeah, but think back to them. Like, we've all had people rip us off and think, be so upset with what they did, and they didn't apologize and make a new commitment. And one thing I would just put in front of people is be really aware: is it possible that you need to make and keep a new commitment, and quit excusing yourself by just judging yourselves on your intent?
I really like that. That's excellent. I also really like where you went with the idea of rebuilding trust, because rebuilding trust when it's lost is really difficult. That's why ideally you don't lose it in the first place.
Yeah.
And the future, even though we live in a technological world, we live in a human world. And in a human world, it's all based, my number one certainty is it's all based on relationships. It's been that way in the past. It'll be that way in the future. And there are bad relationships and there are good relationships. And it really is about trust. And trust, how do you get trust? Well, it's about values. You earn trust through honesty, integrity, delivering on promises. And by the way, all of the values, and those were only 3, are global. They're around the world. And those values, you got to be delivering on those in order to have the highest levels of trust. Comments about that?
I think it's interesting. I used to be an ethics professor and taught in some of the master's courses or whatever. But one of the ethics frameworks, and there are many, we call it the Magnificent Seven, like kind of the 7 values that everybody agrees on. And we've heard different things. But I think I'll take it a step further under values and get personal with it for people listening today. And that is, do you have, each of you leaders out there, do you have decision-making values? What we've learned is people that have a framework for values themselves, for values that they make every decision by, they're more trusted even if I disagree with the values. Because you're trusted to act that way every time. You're going to make those, even if I disagree with you, you're going to make the decision by these 5 things every time, or these 6 things, or these 7 things, or these 3 things. And so, I'm not sure if that answers the question, but it made me jump of what leaders can do today is, would you create, and this is in Trusted Leader, by the way, a process for building decision-making, not values in life. This isn't like faith, family, friendships. This is values I make decisions by. If you look at our content, if you see some of my books behind me or whatever, one of our values is this interactive excellence. So you'll see, like, it's the color and but my first book was this, when I was with, one of the biggest publishers in the world. I wasn't with them right away, and I had a choice between this little publisher that would make it beautiful and the nicest binding and everything with a red ribbon, and this big New York publisher. And we said no to the bigger publisher and went with the tiny publisher with Trust Edge, and we could feel good every night. We did the book by our values. It had color and tabs and everything. Well, when Simon & Schuster Free Press picked it up, they kept it exactly the same. And Simon & Schuster at the time was the biggest publisher in the world, bigger than that one we said no to. And I think none of it would have happened if we wouldn't have stayed true to our values. Now, we could have stayed small, and in any case, we would have felt good about it. But when we have values we make decisions by, people trust us more. Our decision making gets much quicker. So that's just an actionable thing you can do. And in fact, if it's not in there, I was trying to look if it's in the free the tips I'm going to give you, because it's a really cool process. But you can email McKella on that and say, David, how is it we create decision making values? Because that is one way to increase your trust as a leader.
Well, the other thing that you did there when you were thinking about where should I put this book, the big publisher or not, because there's advantages to both, is you weren't thinking about the present. You're thinking about your ideal future.
Right.
Where am I going? What am I about? What is my personal brand, me as a person, as a leader? And what is the brand of the organization that I have, not in the present? We got to think about, what'll it be 5, 10, 15 years?
Totally.
And the other thing is, it's a little litmus test. I have never shared this before, but I'll share it whenever I've got a decision to make. It's a big one. And by the way, that was a big decision you had to make. I know
At
that
the time, I was a nothing. It's like,
well, I
and
know.
then later, we got bought out. I think it was the biggest advance of a non-celebrity that year for ultimately the biggest publisher in the world at the time.
Right, exactly. So when you're faced with those kinds of things, a little litmus test I always do is, well, if I do this, take the road less traveled, which is the road you took, am I going to be proud of myself? So if I'm doing the things that make me proud of me, because I may not be able to make other people proud of me, but you know what? I can do the things that will make me proud of me. And if I'm doing the things that make me proud of me, I'm probably doing the right things. So I just wanted to throw that out there. I've never shared that before, but it's been a nice litmus test that I've used for most of my life. And
I'm going to add 3 questions to that really quickly.
All right.
Number 1, this is under the character pillar. Number 1, would you follow you? Good. That's a litmus question just to add to what you've already said. Number 1, would you follow you? That fits under the character pillar. Number 2, do you have decision-making values? I already talked about that. But do you have values, not just values in life, values you make decisions by? Number 3, as a leader, is there any way you're incentivizing against the trust or the character you say you want to have in this company? Is there any way we're incentivizing? So if you think of the Wells Fargo problem, when they had a great value and visions and all mission and all that, but they started incentivizing their sales team against the character they said they wanted to have, and it cost them millions and millions of dollars. Are you incentivizing toward racism or against racism? Are you because we're incentivizing? If you're a leader, you're the culture keeper, and I want to be a high trust culture keeper if possible. And I'm totally imperfect, by the way, at everything I teach right here at the Institute with the people I'm with, but I want to be a high trust culture keeper because I know high trust cultures are the highest performing, and I just think it's the right thing to do. But I think the question is, some of us think we have the character we're going to have in a company or on a team, and that's not true. We're incentivizing toward or away from higher character every single day. I believe every time you do strategic planning, you should ask, is there any space that we're incentivizing a lack of trust? The final thing, go ahead.
Let me jump in real quick because you made me think of something else, and that is increasingly, this is a hard trend, we are all going to be implementing AI. And by the way, don't think of AI in its current state, think of its the future state, which means beyond exponentially better. And is that AI going to be like those examples of Wells Fargo, where we haven't built in the hallmark of maintaining trust, because it's going to be making decisions. And are those decisions going to be undermining trust? In other words, we better be building that into the algorithms and into the AI, or we're not going to like the future that it helps us create.
And as you know, technology can increase trust, blockchain can increase trust, and technology can decrease trust. And it can do it faster than ever, whether it's on a social media platform. Tech can totally if you take deep fakes, you can totally decrease trust faster than ever before. You take certain types of blockchain, you can totally increase trust where you couldn't have it. Zero trust, funny enough, can increase trust, right? So as far as some of the trends that you talk about and are so brilliant at, you made me think about something else. Just back to the futurist, and I've said this before, you're the best futurist I ever had on my Trusted Leader show. I think you're the smartest futurist there is, so it's worth noting. But I think, my dad, he's 93 years old, and he still runs the farm. Mom and dad, healthy. I just saw them this weekend, funny enough. That's 3 hours north of the Twin Cities where I live. But our farm is beautiful. We grew up, with not much. We're upside down and backwards financially. We grew up in the poorest county in Minnesota. He grew up, bought his first 80 acres when he got out of college, first person to go to college in his family. Or actually, I think it was the money he came back from the Korean War with that he bought his first 80 acres. Anyway, little by little, he built this farm. Even in the poorest county of Minnesota, it's a gorgeous, beautiful farm. I think it was up to 12 or 1,500 acres. And he just only recently at two sold some of it, and he's given away money to organizations they believe in. But I was walking with him, and he just planted, and we used to plant about 1,500 trees a year, and he's big into landscaping because they didn't have grass out in North Dakota where he grew up, and he loves to have green grass, and they're like 10 gardens. It's a beautiful place considering it's in the middle of nowhere. It's just a beautiful farm. But I said, he just planted this whole grove of beautiful fruit trees, in kind of off not the main site of the farm, like this whole other area. And I just said, just tell me about that. And he said, and all he said was, well, some people will enjoy them someday. And he was just thinking about the future, but not about himself. And I think that's a lot of the work you do and we must do in being anticipatory, high trust, anticipatory leaders. And that is, we're thinking of the future, but not just of ourselves. We're not going to be at this company forever. We're not going to be whatever forever, but we're actually, I wish we could go back to, we've become so selfish in America. And in so many ways, nowadays, I don't even want my kids to watch pro sports because everybody points at themselves in their own name. It used to be we celebrate together about our wins. And unfortunately, this is a trend, I think, of selfishness, but I think we need a trend of selflessness. And I think that's this 93-year-old that I just got to walk with, thinking of, I'm not going to enjoy these trees. These weren't for me. These were for somebody else. And I think we need to get our leaders thinking, anticipating the future without themselves in it, in spite of themselves.
Yeah, very good. I think that goes along with, are we focused on success, which is all about us, or are we focused on significance, which is about what we do for others? And so are we a successful organization or are we a significant organization? I would say Dad at 93 obviously is doing significant work that is far beyond himself. This was fantastic. We got to wind this thing up. Thank you so much. Let's put your book back up right away, real quick. Let's get that up there. All right, let's get that. Trusted Leader. I recommend it highly. Let's also have the other, there it is, 22 Trusted Outlook. Remember, sometime late January, get the 23 version, but this is great. You'll want to look at it right now. And let's also put up that email address one more time. So to get all the goodies.
McKella at trustedge.com. And
right.
we'll be happy to get that to you.
All right. And in the subject area, Trust Tools. All right. Thank you again so much. You really made a difference here. And I'm just excited for you and your future. You've been doing fantastic. Congratulations on everything.
Thank you, Dan.
All right. Thank you.